This is not psychotherapy. Dr. Wills does not have a provider-patient relationship with this guest. These are just two people talking about emotions.
Welcome to Give a Actually, with your host, Dr. Alex Wills. Welcome to Give a Fuck Actually. I'm here today with Gina Ryan. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Here's a brief introduction, and then Gina can tell us a bit more. She hosts the Top 50 Mental Health Show on Apple Podcast, the Anxiety Coaches podcast. She's also a nutritionist and coach who has struggled with stress, anxiety, and panic for over 20 years. Before the internet, she was able to climb out of her fear and panic to peace, calm, and well-being by finding what did and didn't work. Gina now teaches thousands of others how to do the same in a fraction of the time, which is music to my ears. I want to learn what you have to offer. She is dedicated full-time to anxiety clearing coaching, podcasting, and teaching clients worldwide. She considers her work her calling and lives a mindful and compassionate life in Hawaii. And I think you were saying before we started that you're over there on Maui.
Yes. The beautiful island of Maui.
Awesome. Anything else you wanted to add or clarify about that?
No, it sounds awesome. My background is pretty big. I noticed before we started here, I was thinking about it, and it seems things came in 12s. I was a nutritionist in my health food stores and the little community for 12 years. Then I worked in eating disorders, intensive outpatient and residential for 12 years. And now the podcast. So here we go.
Good things come in 12s. Awesome. And if folks want to find you, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, you can find everything you need at anxietycoachespodcast.com. Everything is there.
Yeah, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the podcast and how it started and where it's going lately.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun story because I know you're doing a podcast, a lot of people doing podcasts now, but about 8 years ago, I'm in my 8th year, so I had been a guest on a lot of podcasts, and then I was asked to be a kind of a co-host on the Anxiety Coaches podcast. And it was a new podcast. And then shortly after that, the original host decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So I took it over. So it's an unconventional start to podcasting, but it was also when I was turning 60. So I was like, I can be a guest. I can do that. I know I can do that. And I know what I know in my coaching, but I was like, this whole podcasting thing seemed out of my wheelhouse. So the host was kind and he says, I'll give you 2 days of training. And so the rest is history. 8 years later, and it's doing wonderful. And I think that we're helping a lot of people. So.
Yeah. And the concept has to do with anxiety. Is there any main approach, or is it sort of just a big mix of all kinds of stuff related to that?
Yeah, I also have a group and I also do some coaching, although I'm not doing as much personal coaching anymore. So I kind of go by what the temperature of the water is with the group and the email that I get. But I do have I have my own guidelines that I know work and things that have worked for me and worked for clients. And I try to stay in that lane. And a lot of that is that we can make a difference in our lives and we can do it ourselves. We don't have to suffer. Life is painful. There's a lot of difficult things that happen, but we don't have to suffer. We get a lot out of what happens to us, no matter whether it's good or bad. And I stay clear of the medication issue only because that's a very personal issue that I leave up to my listeners and their medical team. Because everybody, I'm not privy to their medical history, any of that. So everyone is welcome because some people carry guilt about medication. Some people are afraid of medication. So we're a big group of everybody is welcome. And then they can ask me questions by email, and I try to answer those on the show. I used to have guests on the show, but I don't do that any longer. This has just worked out better as a solo podcaster. And Anxiety Coaches Podcast is my way of giving what I would have wanted when I was struggling, because I struggled from when I was about 18 to almost 40. And that's a long time. And I knew back then that wasn't called anxiety. People didn't talk about it. People in my neck of the woods didn't even go to therapy. That was just starting to be a thing. So it was, there was no internet. I had to go to the library. I read a lot of books. I never used medications. I was offered a sleep medication by one of my physicians once. And just something in my gut, Alex, just said, you don't need that. And I had seen some friends take some interesting drug choices, which were not pharmaceuticals. They were, so I kind of had this like, let's see what I could do. So I never used medications. So I have this whole 20 years of lifestyle bumping up against things that didn't work.
Right.
And then eventually refined it down to what did help me and what I didn't need to bother with anymore. So, and if I had had some help, it wouldn't have taken that long. But nowadays there's lots of help everywhere, but I offer people free of charge whatever has worked for me, what I find now in the research or what people like you are writing about in these marvelous books. I very much enjoyed your book, by the way. And that's a way of sharing what's new in the world also. So that's what we do.
I love that concept of life is painful, but we don't have to suffer. And, that's kind of the crux of the book. The radical emotional acceptance is some emotions are painful by definition. They're uncomfortable, they're sad, they're scary, they're anxious, but they don't have to be suffering. And if we can look with curiosity at what these emotions are trying to help us with, why they're there, they don't have to be a problem unless we make them into a problem.
Absolutely. Such a nice way to put it. It's like you mention it in the book, and I talk about this often on the show, the second arrow. I think that's a wonderful concept for people to understand. Life does hit us with all kinds of first arrows, and we have to deal with these. I mean, I've been through the hardest things in my life after I crawled out of what I call the anxiety wormhole. The biggest struggles and traumas in my life happened after that, but I didn't go down the wormhole again. I had pain, but I didn't have to suffer. I actually had a different vision of what was happening. And to this day, these are things that actually served me further on in my life. The idea of the second arrow, life was hitting me with those difficult times, but I didn't have to add to it with, oh my God, that's my big term, because that was my thing. I always said to myself, oh my God, and I would just add this other layer of emergency, this fear. This is never going to change. This is how you will feel for the rest of your life. Or other thoughts such as I did something wrong, or people don't like me, or whatever the thought flavor of the moment was. And those are things we don't have to do to ourselves. And so I think this perspective change made a huge difference in my life when I learned that piece. I learned it from Buddhism, but it's out there in many different forms. Yeah. Self-compassion, right? Caring about what we say to ourselves.
Yeah. I love it. It's all music to my ears. I'm curious, any emotions that are kind of coming to mind for you currently, recently? This podcast is a bit of an experiment. You and I don't really know where it's going to go, we're just sort of here to follow the affect, follow the emotions, and see what we can learn from them. Anything come to mind that you wanted to talk about today?
Yeah, when you mentioned that earlier, I had to think real quick because I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about myself here. So I recently, just yesterday, or I think Monday, so 2 days ago, I had a kind of an interesting conversation with a family member where I felt like they weren't giving me the whole story or trying to evade answering my questions. So I had some feelings arise with that, right? And so they were interesting because they were very powerful. They were a little bit more electric than I would have expected. I'm usually pretty calm with this family member and cool. And I found I fell out of curiosity and kind of moved more into like almost anger. Like, why aren't you, so I lost the curiosity and I kind of went to anger. And, so I'd love to have you explore that if you'd like, why do you go there one time and you don't another time?
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So if you could name, there's the anger that you experienced, any other associated emotions or, we think of anger as like a shield emotion that's shielding us from more vulnerable, painful, touchy emotions that we maybe don't want to experience. But along with the anger, there's also other defense mechanisms. Do you have any kind of go-to defense mechanisms or other associated sort of shield emotions like that?
Other shield emotions. I'm not sure. I think in this particular instance, the anger was definitely, I was feeling left out. So I was feeling kind of ignored. So I think it was easier to be angry, which is interesting because it's not I don't go to anger real often. I mean, I don't consider myself an angry person. So that was interesting. So I don't know if it's because it was family, and maybe different things come up with family than with colleagues or friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and anger is a easier emotion to recognize because it's in your face and it's very empowering. When you're angry, no one's going to mess with you because you'll kill them. Like you might come across as intimidating, and it's usually shielding us from pretty scary, vulnerable emotions. In a situation where you are being ignored or you are being left out, what were those more vulnerable emotions that you could name that were coming up for you think?
Well, let's see what could have been coming up. I'm trying to go back there. It wasn't very pleasant. Yeah, I did feel vulnerable, left out, ignored, which is kind of a dangerous kind of place to be. I think that's where the electricity came from, because that's pretty ancient kind of thing. You don't want to be ignored. You need to be in the fold. Maybe a little resentful. I think I might have felt a little resentful because I have tried to be very helpful to these people. And so maybe it was like, well, now you don't want to tell me things.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of pain, a lot of kind of hurt too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hurt's a good one. That would be definitely when you feel ignored, that feels very hurtful. Yeah.
Would you say a sense of betrayal in a way?
Yeah, I think that would be a good word, betrayal.
Yeah.
Even though it sounds very big and strong, like, oh, I like him certain. But in the moment, that is kind of the feeling. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, other emotions to name? Sad, disappointed, any other associated emotions?
Well, I think they would go more toward the anger piece, or maybe things that would be under anger, because I kind of did a like, okay, fine, let's just drop it. I can go away. I kind of did that thing.
Yeah.
But with an angry tone to it, which is why it's interesting, because it's not my usual thing. So I don't know. What do you think might have been under that anger to make me want to go and then leave? Like, just drop it. Let's just drop it.
Right, right. Yeah. And it sounds like something about that really, triggered you. It's something, because like you said, normally you don't really find yourself experiencing intense anger too often. Yeah.
Yeah. So it might have triggered something from the past, or which obviously it did, because it was my mother.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And how she was handling a particular situation with other family members. So it had there was a lot to work with there.
Yeah, no doubt. There's this Zen Buddhist saying that when you feel like you've become enlightened, just go and spend the weekend with your parents or your family of origin, and you'll realize that you have like made no progress.
Absolutely. They are our total teachers and bring us right back to earth again. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know I do that for my kids too.
How do you, right now, just checking in, how are you doing talking about this? What kind of emotions are coming up? Have you kind of gained a little bit of insight so far, just sort of looking at it with more curiosity now that you're out of the heat of the moment anger?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually looking at it from like, I'm calm now, and also looking at it with a guide where like you're asking me questions, so that's helping me just delve a little bit deeper or look at something I may not have paid attention to before. Yeah, because I was just looking at it as they made me angry. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because these defense mechanisms or shield emotions like anger, they can serve a purpose in the heat of the moment. They help us to sort of protect our ego. They help us to, be tough, or to be stoic, or to be defensive. And the situation, may have called for that. Maybe it wasn't a safe place to become vulnerable and break down. You didn't necessarily feel understood or heard or safe to open up more in that moment with that person.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. It was because it's a phone call. It's, in the middle of the workday. There's not time. So it was almost like I was protecting myself again with that anger, to be like, okay, if I push you away a little bit with anger, I can get on with what I need to do and take care of myself, rather than continue to open up this issue. Yeah.
Right.
Continue to talk about it. Yeah. Very good.
What strikes me is that there must have been some fear there, that if, the anger can also, at least in the moment, or at least we can convince ourselves that it's protecting us from what we're afraid of. Because what do you think you were afraid of if you didn't drop it, if you kept pressing, if you became vulnerable? What might have happened?
Yeah. With this situation, I think if I had I think I was overstepping a boundary. I think because I was being told, we're not going to talk about this now. But I knew that other people knew what was going on, and I was just checking in and they didn't want to tell me. So, I felt like there was a boundary there, and that I really couldn't cross it. Like at some point, okay, I do have to drop this. They're not going to talk about it. And then I think I felt the anger because I felt I'm being left out. So it was my protection. I don't even remember what your question was on that, but that's just what came up.
Yeah. And I'm curious if if you had kept pushing it, maybe there was just a healthy fear that it could have made it worse. It could have become a blow up, or you could have ruptured the relationship, or something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was kind of a signal like, don't go any further. Yeah.
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 And that's such a key point right there, because you know, your podcast talks about anxiety, and I think of anxiety as a manifestation of fear. What is fear good for? Why do we humans have anxiety? What is it? Is there a purpose? Is it just to make us even more miserable? Is it just more second arrows? Or what do you see as the purpose of us even having that?
Yeah, it's such a protective mechanism. It's so keeping us alive and safe. And that's where many times on the show we talk about embracing that time that you're afraid and not doing a second arrow and getting mad at yourself or distracting with it, like really like paying attention. Because for so long, and even in my own case, all those years, there were many things I was not paying attention to. And my mind and body were screaming at me, that there were things going on that I was not paying attention to. And they didn't even need to be big things. But when you start adding these things up, there were places where I was not particularly in danger for my life, but it was enough that my brain, the amygdala, was picking up that I was not safe. And that's going to pick that up. If you and I had an argument, my amygdala was going to snap into that, but it doesn't mean you're going to kill me.
Right.
But, that's just the way that brain works. That's that ancient part of us. And there's so many things, such as we were just talking in my case of me being left out. Like, historically, that would have meant I would die because I wasn't part of the crowd. I wasn't part of the tribe, and I would be left alone and I couldn't survive. So even though that's not the exact scenario, that's the way my brain is interpreting it, as that big of a deal. And so I think when we use, as you use the word curiosity also, that can really help us figure out where is this coming from? And are there other things I should be paying attention to or giving more attention in my daily life to? Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a good point too. Feelings and emotions, I find it really essential to separate them out, because the emotions I think of as just those raw, visceral sensations we get in our body, or somehow in our mind we become aware, and they don't need an explanation. I could tell you right now that I'm feeling joy or sadness or fear or disgust or hate or lonely. And you don't have to know why about any of that. But all of a sudden, if you have normal empathetic mirroring neurons in your mind, you all of a sudden know what it's like to be me at this moment. And you already know so much more about me than if I were to talk your ear off for an hour about all the details of he said, she said, all that kind of stuff. So the feelings are when you add a story to an emotion. And I think that's where we could get kind of lost. And because the stories that we make up or we believe, just sort of these automatic thoughts, like they talk about in cognitive behavioral therapy, are often toxic or maladaptive or just not true. Like the mind is like this popcorn machine that's just like constantly just making up stories to try to explain stuff, whether it's true or not,
Yes.
In your example, I'm thinking the feeling might be along the lines of, I'm being left out or I'm being ignored. And that might be a true situation. But the emotions underneath that, you said feeling vulnerable, resentful, hurt, betrayed. also that fear, like it taps into that primal tribal need that we have to be part of the tribe, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm not part of the tribe, I'm as good as dead. So that's a very good fear response to like wake us up and say, hey, I got to figure out what's wrong or my life's at risk, right?
Yeah. And that's a great way to look at it. It's trying to wake us up, like pay attention. Yeah.
Yeah. So looking back now, I love it when I myself or, folks I talk to say, I'm not an angry person, because I think of anger as a very ubiquitous part of being human. If you don't believe it, just go stub your toe and, listen to the words trying to jump out of your mouth, right?
Exactly.
I think anger, just like all emotions, happens to us, and it's just a healthy, natural, normal response. And so looking back at that situation, you had a lot to be angry about because there was a lot at stake. And regardless of like the situation, there was a risk of not being connected, not being in the know, not being part of the group, not being trusted. And that's huge. And I think we gaslight ourselves by saying that, oh, I shouldn't have been so angry. I shouldn't have let it get to me. I shouldn't have the intensity of these emotions that I have. And then we go down a really bad cycle of suppressing our emotions and gaslighting ourselves, trying to tell ourselves that we shouldn't feel how we feel. Yeah,
very good. And it's really good for us to remember, and myself in that situation or that example, that the anger was there, period. That's all. I need to, okay, there was anger there. Yeah. Then I can get curious about that, but I don't need to shut it down. I don't need to say, oh, because of course I have anger. Believe me, I do. Just ask my kids. Yeah. And, but I don't, I'm not normally, I don't spend a lot of time in anger. Right. So I'm very aware of it when it arises, because it's kind of like, oh yeah, this is one I got to pay attention to. And so I actually didn't spend a lot of time with that situation that happened to me on Monday, being curious about why I was angry. So this is eye-opening in that just spending time being curious about it. And wow, I really was angry, versus just blowing it off or, however, I think that's probably what I wanted to do. Just shut it down. Y'all are making me angry. So I'm just going to go away.
Yeah. I'm afraid sometimes people might think I'm a bit sadistic, but I think the opposite is true, because I'm so happy that you were so angry and upset. Not because I want you to suffer, right? But because you had no choice. You didn't choose to have those emotions, and you didn't choose to have the intensity. That was actually there to help you and to wake you up to the reality that, hey, there's a big risk in this relationship at this moment. And I'm having my, fire alarms go off pretty hardcore, because I need to pay attention to really look closely at what's happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a gift. It's like there is so much to know when you start to really think about it and pay attention. And, it's beautiful how the mind and body works like that. Like it is talking to us. This is the conversation we're having, and to be able to pay attention to it and not put the uncomfortable feelings in one, or emotions in one pile. Like, oh, I got to stay away from those, and I got to get more of these. Like, that's just where we get into trouble, right? At least for me, you can't just go for good things all the time. Like, we have to ride this whole wave, and sometimes it's up and sometimes it's down, and both of them, inform the next one. So like, we have to take the whole thing. And to one of the things that helped me get out of anxiety was to not be afraid when those feelings came. I didn't have to be afraid of them. That was the second arrow, was fearing the fear. It was
Yeah.
my big second arrow. And that's what is fueling what most people who have chronic fear or anxiety, we all have anxious moments all the time. But when it's chronic and you can't even find yourself relaxing enough to go to sleep at night on a regular basis, it's because you're just so afraid of it. It's like I call it trying to keep that beach ball underwater. Like you can do it for a little bit, but it's exhausting and it's going to come popping back up when you least expect it, right? When you least want it to happen, you're going to get all that popping right back up again.
Yeah.
So it's okay to feel them. It's probably one of the biggest lessons I learned was it was okay to feel even the fears I was feeling.
Yeah, I call it emotiaphobia, or the irrational fear of our emotions, or like you call it, the fear of fear, which is worse. And, for my patients, for myself, it takes so much coaching. I think I have to even continually remind myself after all of these years living with radical emotional acceptance that these emotions are not here to hurt me. They're not here to torture me. I have to realize that if I can tune into what they're teaching me, what they're trying to make me aware of, they're only there to help. But it's so easy just to go back to that old kind of, knee-jerk reaction of like, nope, I just want to feel good. I want to just be zen all the time. I don't want to fucking be angry. I don't want to be scared. And go to those go-tos that can kind of help us temporarily keep that beach ball underwater, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause that's just temporary. It doesn't go anywhere. Yeah. Yeah. It's so important. And it's not easy to do because we're busy. So I wonder if you've noticed that with people, like this whole, we're so busy. We're always on phones or screens or, that's about it. Usually phones or screens.
Right.
And, that we're like in a hurry to get to the next thing. So we're pushing all these things down. Usually the uncomfortable emotions, people are willing to feel joy. Although I have to say, a lot of people not even spending a lot of time there. I don't know. We're always just running up to the next thing. So I wondered if you have seen that. Is there are people just plowing through life, letting everything go to the side just to get to the next moment versus spending time in this one?
Yeah, I think busyness is a very effective tool of suppression. Yeah. It's easy just to stay super busy and just preoccupy yourself with all kinds of tasks and TikTok videos. It's very effective. And so it's a big go-to. I was working with a lady earlier today, and she sees how her mom, whose brother is on hospice, is terminal, is powering through, planning all of these things, working her butt off, as just obviously trying to suppress any of her sad and painful emotions that are going on. And she's just sort of watching it like a slow motion train wreck that she can't stop.
Yeah.
And, it's hard taking baby steps or giant steps to just do the opposite. Just have that faith that what we're saying is true, that if we have curiosity, I love that you use that word curiosity, to just hold space for the anger, the fear, the anxiety, the loneliness, whatever the emotion might be, and tune into what the wisdom is. What is it trying to teach you? What is it there for? And it almost always leads to some sense of direction or some sense of understanding your reality or the status of a relationship a lot better,
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. Hearing you talk about that woman keeping busy with of course, there are things that need to be done and taken care of. It reminds me of people who have terminal illnesses or cancer, and they write, and it's written in the obituary how they were such a trooper and they worked right up to the very end. And like, it makes me want to cry. I can just feel that, like, really? Like, I don't want to do that. Like, the feelings and things that must have been coming up around, knowing that you're terminally ill or when you're in hospice or someone you love is in hospice. Like, these are, believe it or not, like magical times to be there. Like, when I had a friend who was in hospice. She died of, she had liver cancer. And, that was like the most amazing time, knowing that Nikki was never going to go to the mall again or go walk on the beach with us again. Like, we really were there with that. And when you can feel the struggle of it and the pain of it, there's so much on the other side of it that we would have missed had we been kind of afraid or just, I don't know, watched videos with her or something. You know what I mean? There's so much of life is in the challenge, is in the difficulty. And there's so many gifts there. I just hope that people will not be afraid. It's this whole fear, like, I can't handle that. I can't do that. And you also mentioned holding space. I wanted to say that maybe you find this with your patients, that I have so many men that follow me and men that come. We have some men in our group and men that I have as one-on-one clients. I was always surprised because I always thought I was like, your girl buddy, I will listen to you and we'll hammer this out. But I don't think so many men have a place to go. And I kind of have like this mom energy. I realize this as the older I get, the worse it gets. But I have this mom energy that just won't go away. But it's something that so many people seem to need, like just a place to say what they're feeling, being given the time, because we're so busy moving to the next thing all the time. There's something else to do. So you come and sit with me for an hour and it just comes out because there's we're not doing anything else. We're just kind of hanging and letting those things that bubble up. And it's so beautiful to me to see them let it come out. And it makes me wonder how long, and some of them have told me very long time, that these things have never come out. These emotions, these thoughts, these feelings. So it is no wonder that they are expressing outside or in life that they're anxious, and the big one is angry, because under a lot of anger is anxiety, is this bubbling fear. But it looks better to be bigger and stronger and angry than we all have our direction we go, crying in the corner, that was more my style. So I think there's got to be more places for people to be able to go and do this, to be able to open up.
Yeah. And I'm really digging the maternal energy, and I'm glad you have some insight into that and how it's so needed. That's such an interesting topic too, about, us guys having very, very few outlets to express, what emotions we have going on. Just today, I was writing my wife back an email, and I had a few moments between patients, and it was supposed to be maybe a 2-sentence reply. And I ended up writing like a book to her. It was sort of like a bit of a journaling, but it ended up being a great tool to just sort of pour out the various stressors, anxieties, fears, frustrations that have been going on. And like you mentioned a few moments ago, simply naming it, simply naming those emotions, simply being heard and validated, and just saying like, I don't even know why, but I'm feeling some intense sadness or whatever. That in itself is so healing, because we're getting in tune with reality. And that's a big piece of the puzzle,
Yeah. Getting in tune with reality. Yeah. Because if we ignore it, we're leaving it out of our reality. It's there, but we won't acknowledge it. And that takes a little time and space. Yeah. I hope your book will make a difference with that, because it seems to be giving people permission to actually let these things be.
Yeah. I mean, that's my hope. My gift to the world is simply that if we could all see that emotions are not the problem and they're actually the solution, I think all of the world's problems can be fixed. It's a bit ambitious, but as soon as we tune into that truth, then I think we have a better foundation to try to get our world back, because, things seem to be going to hell in a handbasket all around us,
Pretty rapidly. Yeah.
But I wanted to touch on, this idea that life is kind of like a movie. I can't think of a great movie that doesn't have a lot of trials and tribulations and a lot of, negative, painful emotions. The best movies have sort of the worst shit happening. And if we can tune into our life is really like a great movie or a series of movies. And the more we embrace the reality and embrace the full spectrum of all of those emotions, the more we're truly living, I think for a long time, like my go-to sort of opiate was movies, because I could watch other people having problems and other people having tragedy, and I could veg out and it's like safe. It's in the box. It's behind the screen. And I could have those sort of emotions, but not have it really affect me. But then I was living my life vicariously through these stories instead of actually living my own movie, which is really, we're only alive once. And if, get to your deathbed, do you want to look back and say that you really lived, or that you were just playing it safe and that you gosh darn it, I kept that anxiety at bay all those years,
I know. Yeah. Because that feels so phony, doesn't it? Like, yeah, I did it. But when you see people who have been tough like that in their lives, when you see them be vulnerable and actually let those things that are bubbling up in them, when they let them come out and actually have tears and have moments of awe that they can even feel these things fully, it's amazing. And I think your idea of being able to change the world with that is actually right on, because we're all so busy deflecting and holding things down and pushing things down. We don't even know what's true or real anymore inside of us.
Right. Yeah. Circling back to your story now of this conflict that happened with your newfound emotional wisdom and sort of tuning into the wisdom of those painful emotions, the fear. I think the big insight you said was just sort of realizing that you were at risk of not being part of the tribe, which is, detrimental. And this is family. So this is really, super important stuff. What are you able to see now, and how can you better understand what those emotions were trying to help you with?
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing that I was actually feeling very old feelings, because it actually was not an unusual situation, meaning, I'm in my late 60s. So, I've had this come up at other times in my life in this same kind of scenario. And I think it brought up, because I think my reaction was a little like, for what was happening, it felt a little big.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm seeing, I think it was because it brought up the memories of other times that has happened many times, and that I didn't deal with it, right? That again, these were things that were pushed down or buried, or, it's just me. Cause I would take things on myself. Oh, it's just me. I'm too sensitive, or, and actually this whole thing gives me an opportunity to kind of unearth some of that.
Yeah.
and put some light on it, so that maybe what I tell people is when you don't bury these things, they get to move through you. They come and they get to move through, and they made their natural course. And but I have things obviously still stuck down in there, and I would love to shine the light of day on those and free them, set them free.
I wonder, and I'm really curious with you about this. Instead of thinking of this as something that you need to get over or work through, like I try not to use language like, I got to work through these emotions, because all of this language sort of suggests that emotions are a problem.
Right.
I need to fix it. I need to work through it. I need to get resolution. It's like, well, you're setting yourself up for failure because you've already defined the emotions as a problem, as something bad. So rather than thinking this is like a weakness, I see this as a strength for you, which is that you're highly attuned to the threat of rupture in relationships, to not being part of a tribe, to being an outcast, or to be, left out or ignored. And that's a superpower, because that's a really essential thing for someone in the tribe, at least, to have that attunement to make sure that you're going to, figure out a creative way to get the tribe back together, to resolve this if possible. You're familiar with people who have borderline personality disorder. And one of the diagnostic features is this fear of abandonment. Yeah. And I get all kinds of borderlines coming in, and they're like, I just have this fear of abandonment and I got to get over it. I got to fix it. But I really started to rethink that, because I'm afraid of abandonment. I think, if you're abandoned by your tribe, your friends, your family, your loved ones, that's horrible. That's one of the worst things that could possibly happen. And so instead of thinking that as an illness or a symptom or a diagnostic criteria of a mental disease, I think of it as more of, wow, you're very sensitive, you're very attuned to the threat of abandonment. And that's a great thing, because abandonment sucks. It doesn't mean that, we need to try to suppress it and then freak out about it and go cut ourselves or something. But it does mean that, hey, relationships are important. I don't want to be abandoned. I don't want to abandon other people. I don't want people to get abandoned. And so how can we creatively, proactively work towards relationships where abandonment is very unlikely, Yeah.
Yeah. And use those people who have that superpower as the canaries in the coal mine. They are the people who can feel it coming, or where there's a problem. Like, again, that's where their difficulty that gave them that borderline. I don't use those labels. I'm not a therapist. But these are things that have actually given them strength that other people don't have. And of course, anything we do can be taken to an extreme, but why not use what we have and consider it? I love your perspective of this doesn't have to be something that needs to be fixed or a problem that needs to be taken care of, like once and for all. It's how can we use this? We've got it. It's there. It's obviously been there for a reason. And so how can we use it? This is beautiful.
I just felt like the air just really cleared, and all of the emotions, the anger, the intensity, everything that you experienced was exactly right. There was no pathology. There wasn't anything wrong with it. And it is all there for a purpose to, tune you into, something's amiss, and to give you energy and motivation to creatively try to figure out, what to do next. And you don't have to tell us what you're going to do next, but hopefully you have some ideas churning with some optimism.
Yeah, absolutely. And your words help me realize that the part I play in the family with siblings and mother and else, that I am kind of that one, that I'm the one that talks to everybody. Not everybody in my family talks to each other, but I talk to so I feel like I'm like that I'm there in the center. And yeah, this is probably another reason I'm very in tune to how everybody is feeling and trying to keep everybody in the fold as best they can be. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a brilliant note to end on. Before we do wrap up, did you have anything else that you wanted to mention or remind folks of where they can find you?
Yeah. So we have podcast comes out twice a week. We're in 900 and some odd episodes.
Wow.
And you can find those at your favorite podcast player, wherever you listen, the Anxiety Coaches Podcast, or you can go to the anxietycoachespodcast.com and find everything there. So that's the best way to find us. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much for coming on. It's just been a pleasure to meet you and get to know you in such a short time simply by sharing some of your emotions. I feel like I know you better than I know a lot of people.
It was wonderful. It was kind of a surprise, but it was a wonderful way for me. I feel close to you, like that I could share these types of things and to have this whole different perspective. Always growing. We're always growing and learning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Hey guys, thanks for watching. This is Dr. Alex Wills with Give a F Actually. Make sure to check us out on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out the merch store. RadicalEmotionalAcceptance.com. Bye.
Bye.